Hey everyone, this video is the first in a series. I just recorded it today. I've always wanted to do on-stream mentoring, which is a very public endeavor. And so I had a few mentees sign up a couple of years ago when I expressed interest in doing something like this. And today was the first session with Beardage, whom you'll see in just a bit. This is very experimental. I don't know how this series will pan out. I don't know how many people will be interested or who will learn from this or gain any sort of benefit from it. So please do comment on whether you like this, how you think it could be improved, and I hope you enjoy the session. So I'm going to stop looking at chat now. We're going to kind of get into the session. Make sure to check audio levels. This stuff is done, and we're going to say starting the session. So, hi, you know what this is about. I
Yes.
don't know much of what you want to gain yet. I haven't looked through this document before, just briefly scanning it earlier today. The way I kind of see this going, I divide mentoring into kind of three phases. One is discovery, where I learn about you, I learn about what you want, I learn about how I can help. And then two is kind of the skill building or habit forming. And then three is polish. And so polish would be probably many months down the line where we're just like, okay, you're mostly there, and we kind of see what we can do from there. So, what is it you're looking for out of mentoring? How would you like to benefit from this? Kind of, yeah, tell me some
Yeah,
more stuff.
I'm not totally sure. I guess from where I'm coming from is when you asked me 2 years ago, I was in a very different place than I am now. I was kind of in a transitionary period.
Mhm.
Now I am kind of in it again, but I'm trying to transition into a even more senior role, like staff level. Um, I work at a small startup that doesn't have. There's only one staff level engineer right now. Um, So as the company scales, that will become available to me. Um, you know, Other options are moving to another company, that kind of stuff. But essentially, I would like to be at a staff level in a few years, five maximum. So I'm kind of trying to do, um, you know, learn the non-coding skills and um, kind of like design skills to function at that higher level. And I know there's lots of different types of staff engineers and stuff like that. So it depends on where I work, but that's kind
Okay,
of
I
like
see. And when you say design skills, are you talking about code design skills?
yeah,
Okay,
like architecture and stuff.
yeah. So, how long have you been at your current company for?
Uh, just over a year, like a year and 2 months.
Okay. And this staff person who's been there, have they been there for a longer time? I guess what's the general lifespan of the company so far? Because you said it's pretty small. Well, 50 people.
Yeah, I think the company has been around for like 3 years. Not all of it has been at like full speed, basically, but the staff level person has been there from the beginning and has worked with the CEO on previous businesses before. So he's kind of like his like foundational engineer.
Okay, I see. So one of the first engineers. And does it look like the trajectory of growth of this company is enough such that they could have two staff level people? Is that something you've talked to anybody about?
Yeah, my uh, my direct manager has like is aware that I would like to move into that, and it's kind of like giving me more responsibility and stuff like that to kind of move in that direction as the company scales.
Okay. So you've already shared this intent with your manager. Your manager is supportive, at least ostensibly, is giving you more responsibilities. How long ago did these conversations start?
I started reading like a staff engineering book. I forget which one it is, but I can look it up if you'd like. But like 6 months ago, and kind of shared that information with him and said that it was like something I'd be interested in. Um, and yeah, he's been really supportive. He was an engineer before becoming like the head of engineering, so he was a front end engineer as well. So he's kind of like very similar mindset to me.
Okay. And so do you have any? Oh, I apparently didn't turn off subscription sounds. So sorry if you can hear that too. Um, do you have any sort of timeline on this yourself? I know you mentioned you want to be at staff in a few years. Uh, if that weren't to happen or doesn't look like it's going to happen after a year and a half, would you start saying, okay, time to ramp up interviewing?
Yeah, so I would like to practice interviewing more. I haven't done a ton of interviews. Like I've kind of been lucky in that like the places I've interviewed at, I've mostly gotten jobs. Some of that's being in a small town, and some of that's just kind of like the way it worked out, the luckiness. But yeah, I would like to take more interviews in general, like even like starting now, just to as practice with no intention of taking the job, um,
Okay,
and just a skill.
I see. I see. Uh, so in the okay, there is an alert. So let me go see really fast.
I don't hear it for the record.
Okay, yeah. Technical difficulty. The chat window on screen is not updating. I'm assuming you want that to update. Yeah, I do. Oh, now it unfroze. Okay, I'll just leave that open. Um, so let me recollect my thoughts, and this is why I write everything down. By the way, if you have this document open, you should be able to see me typing these out.
Yep.
So if you were to start interviewing now just as a skill, and then you do get staff software engineer, let's say in a year, and you're happy at that company, would you feel like it's still a skill you wanted and that you'd have appreciated?
Interviewing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think with the climate, it's kind of like a hedge. I'd like to be good at it in case I need it, that
Okay.
kind of thing.
Okay. So yeah, I think this is good to know. I look at this as, like I said, this is part of the discovery phase. You've essentially listed out two things, and you said it originally. It's not like I had to suss this out, but yeah, getting to staff and then also having interview skills. So if you were to rate the two, which is more important to you?
Um, Probably getting to staff. Oh, I guess operating at a staff level is kind of like the crux of it because I see a path to staff um, at my current company, but whether or not my current company's staff engineer is comparable to other ones is kind of like up in the air. But I'd like to operate at a staff like an agreeable staff level for other companies, so
I
that
see.
I do if I do have to interview,
Okay, and
I'm
so
there.
this may be a little personal. By the way, if anything is ever too personal, feel free to just say you don't want to share. What is the appeal of staff for you? Is it things like I would have more impact? I would be able to. I'd have a different level. I could delegate. I get more money. All the above, that sort of thing. So
Yeah, so as I've been reading through this staff engineering book, there's like archetypes of different staff engineers, and the job itself seems interesting. Like I like the you know doing experiments and figuring out the direction of engineering, um, like well in advance, and kind of being able to create projects and drive those to create impact and stuff like that. It's kind of what's appealing to me. So like it's the work itself rather than just like the status or whatever.
okay, got it. Um, and so along that line, you're a senior engineer now. To what capacity have you worked on projects? Have you spun up work yourself? Have you been able to delegate to other people?
Yeah, my current company, I have juniors that are underneath me, and so I am currently delegating projects. I usually do a lot of the specking out of when a new project is kind of comes down from product, um, and help engineers kind of like plan out the gotchas, all that kind of stuff, like figure out tickets and things like that. So I'm doing that as like a part of my capacity right now, and I think um, as far as like creating projects, I haven't gotten to that stage yet. So like I've worked with product to kind of figure stuff out sometimes, but um, it's mostly like do the hard stuff right now and help people get set up to do the not as difficult stuff, more straightforward stuff.
I see. So this project that you talked about with your manager, or not project, I guess the intent that you signaled to your manager about becoming staff, it sounds like there'd be more of, okay, product is doing their own thing. We probably want you, Kyle, to do your own thing as well. Is that the direction that they're taking this? Are they taking a different direction?
Yeah, so I don't. There wasn't hasn't really been an established track for staff at my company, which is kind of where I'm confused about how to proceed. But that's kind of the impression that I get is that I would kind of operate parallel to product or in conjunction. But as far as like driving engineering projects that maybe don't come down to pure features or something like that.
Yeah, I see. And I think in my experience at companies, although usually they're bigger companies, they do have a defined track, and it usually boils down to a few kind of key characteristics. You can see my screen, right?
Yep.
Okay. So I think it mostly boils down to things like leadership, impact, the complexity of work that you do, and maybe there's another thing here. I think independence is just kind of a given at that point, where you're expected at senior probably to be operating mostly independently. And so I think it's the sort of impact. You have some junior engineers working for you already. To steer more of the company direction is probably what I would consider staff to be. And of course, this depends on what your manager would consider it to be as well. I think having a plan with the manager is, of course, the best thing since your manager works there and knows. You said your manager is not doing engineering stuff anymore. Who were they in relation to the founders of the company?
So he was, I think, the third engineer that was brought on, and then he left, and then boomeranged back as a engineering manager.
I see. So
But
lots
he's
of
been
came
doing
back.
really well in general. So like it's worked out so far.
Yeah. Yeah. The part of the reason I ask about this is because the closer they are to the founders, the more their word would probably have meaning.
Yeah.
Because you might be talking to a manager who's kind of giving you lip service and is saying something like, "Oh yeah, I don't mind if you want to get promoted," and gets more work out of you, and there is no real promotion at the end of the line. Are you on good terms with the founders? With
Yeah. In general, yes. I don't talk to the founder that much, but my manager does have that like relationship, that leverage with him.
okay, and so what is the hierarchy? It goes you and then your manager and then the CEO or
Yeah.
okay. And so and that staff level engineer that's already there, they're essentially the CTO, it sounds like.
Um, they still fall under this manager, so he's like head of engineering essentially.
I see. Okay. Okay. So it's also the staff person, manager, and then CEO.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, yeah. So you said about 6 months ago you started reading this book, and that's when you started having conversations with your manager. What has materialized out of that? What differences have you seen in the last 6 months?
Yeah. So he's kind of like assigned me as like tech lead of large projects. So I've been responsible for scoping, estimates, that kind of stuff. Kind of like core, like um, organizing work and making sure it gets done, that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
When like delegating, that kind of stuff. So um, more than like I would say before that, it was more just like get these tickets done, and now it's kind of like manage these projects.
Okay. So there's been a material change to your work. And this has been how long of that 6 months, would you say?
Um, Probably about 6 months. I had a parental leave at some point, like 8 months ago. So it was kind of like after I came back from that, it was kind of like full
Okay,
speed.
cool. By the way, congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Um, okay, so this is actually really good, I think. It sounds like your manager really is following through on this and is giving you the extra experience. And so, what have been your struggles with this new world that you're in the last 6 months?
Yeah, so we've hired, um, we've doubled the engineering team, maybe tripled. I don't know. We're up to like 12 or something now, but we were four when I started. So uh, done a ton of hiring. There's a lot of there's like kind of like seniority ranks in each uh, team now. So there's like a mobile team, client, which is what I'm on, which is web essentially, and then like a backend group. And um, yeah, I guess struggles would be like more of my work is being more of my time is being taken up by code reviews, like non things that aren't easy to show value in terms of like to the wider company. So kind of like how do I like present that I'm still showing value when like more of my work is kind of not super visible or like not easy to be shown. I have other stuff, but that's the first one.
Okay. So the way I look at management in general is that, and you might have heard this term for management, but it's a force multiplier. So instead of you doing work, you're essentially helping other people do work. So if you have 5 direct reports, maybe you're getting, 3.5x the work done that you normally would have gotten done. And also those people need direction and someone's got to give them those tasks. And it sounds like you're carving those out. If all of the engineers are reporting to this head of engineering, your manager, then that will eventually stop scaling. You can't have 200 direct reports underneath you and give them the time and care they need and grow them too. I don't know, is that another one of your responsibilities eventually, is to actually be a people manager? I know you said tech lead right now.
No. So that's specifically, I've told him that I don't want to go that route. I would like to stay on the technical side. And he kind of echoed what you just said. Like he knows that he's not going to be able to scale like that. So like he's looking to hire like a engineering manager, like a more of a people manager, basically, at some point in the next year.
Okay. By the way, that's another signal. Um, if that ends up happening, it means that again, they're serious about following through. You said they've tripled the engineering team since you started, which means it was essentially your manager, the other staff level engineer, and you were a pretty early hire, I'm guessing.
Hmm.
But that wasn't all in the last 6 months, right? That was more in the last 14 months.
Right. Yeah.
O-
In the last 6 months, I would say we, hired at least 5 people though.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. So yeah, roughly doubling in 6 months. Um, Getting back to the visibility struggle. So I think the bit about it being a force multiplier is something that's important to understand because it code reviews do provide value. Someone needs to do them. Someone needs to enforce your software engineering practices that you have. And code reviews are an excellent point of doing that. And it sounds like you already have a culture, so you don't need to change the culture of that. Is this understood by your manager? Because what your concerns are may not be the same concerns that your manager has.
Yeah, and every time I vocalize this on our like regular one-on-ones, like it feels weird. Like I'm not used to not having as much output, and it feels like I feel, you know, anxious that I don't have as much output. Um, but he's quick to reassure me that he like understands, and like that's kind of part of the plan and stuff. It's just kind of like my own mental transition into like I can't ship out features as fast as I used to.
Yeah. And the way I'd look at it is I don't think that should be your metric that you have of shipping out features, but as a company, it should be. And so if those things are getting done with your guidance, that's essentially your output. It's a little weird to say it that way, but that's
Yeah.
kind of what was happening before when you were a senior engineer just handling tickets. Someone above you, was probably your manager, was saying, "Oh, look at what we got done." It's not like your manager was the one doing that stuff. And no
Yeah.
better to ask than your manager. It sounds like you have a good relationship with him.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, yeah, good
And the
relationship.
rate of like overall rate of tickets has gone up, or has of feature delivery has gone way up in the last, 6 months. So that is increasing a lot.
I think that's good. I think the results are starting to speak for themselves. I don't think you have cause for concern here necessarily because it sounds like the process has started. Your manager has shown that they're willing to follow up. They want to hire an engineering manager themselves. They want to give you more tasks. They have given you more tasks. You have delivered on that as well. Otherwise, the feature delivery rate wouldn't have gone up. And so I think you're already kind of in this positive feedback loop that you need to be in. I think when it comes to working on your own mentality about I'm not working on the same stuff. I think there are some modal shifts that happen in our own thinking as we just kind of grow older. So you're in school for like 20 something years, right? And for the
Yeah.
longest time, all you have are your grades and not even necessarily did I learn something, but am I getting good grades? Am I moving on to the next grade of school that I'm in? Then you get out of school, you find a job, and again, you're on a track. And you're on a track right up until about senior, which is what I think you've seen so far. And then you
Hmm.
start to say, what do I want to pursue? Do I want to specialize in something? Do I want to become a people manager? Do I want to go the staff level that you're going right now? So I think in each of these modal shifts, when you're no longer pursuing grades, when you're going and working, and maybe then you consider salary, you consider where you're living, how far your commute is, all these sorts of things. You have a kid, you you have a family. I think the modal shift here is I used to have concrete deliverables that had easy to define metrics. And now you have different metrics. And I think the more you can lean on your manager, given that you have a good relationship with them, the more they can tell you what's expected and what isn't. So essentially, I'm kind of saying like snap yourself to their set of expectations because it sounds like they're doing well. They've been at the
Mhm.
company for a while. They chose to leave for some reason. If it were me, I would probably ask something like, why did you choose to do that? You said they did bounce back as a manager. So maybe it was to get leveled up themselves. Maybe they felt like there weren't the opportunities. It also sounds like that was potentially before when you had joined. Is that what happened?
Yeah, so I joined, and the person that hired me left that week, and my new manager came back that
I
week,
see.
essentially.
Yeah. So they were there essentially from the beginning of the company until whenever they left to get leveled up. Probably things hadn't grown very much since, like you said, since you started, it went from 4 to 12. You
Mhm.
presumably being one of those four, and your manager being one of those four. So your manager was there when the team was 2 or 3 engineers. That probably wasn't a lot of opportunity there. And now you're able to deliver more features, you're able to grow the team. So yeah, lean on your manager for their expectations. This is a kind of weird thing to say, but it's something that I think will get you up to what they expect faster than if I were to say something like, this is all expected, this is fine, which by the way, it is expected and fine. And I am going to say that, but I don't think it's going to be as convincing coming from me. Um, and so, almost in my mind, the way I kind of look at this is, and I'm not trying to trivialize any of this, I would say we should definitely talk about this in the second session and we should kind of see how things have gone and what you've done and are you still on an upward trajectory. But there's probably not too much to talk about there, at least not now. And if you feel that's not the case, for sure, feel free to chime in because I don't want to, be rigid about my expectations of this stuff either. But it sounds like this is on the right track. So what I would probably do now is I'd probably shift to talking about the interviewing aspect of this and then kind of touch base next time. Does that sound reasonable? Do you want to talk about this some more?
Yeah, the only thing that I would say, maybe as something to watch, I guess, is my mentality around this, um, this change is it's tough for me because I, hold anxiety about it, and then um, I spend a lot of time kind of like making up for it. So like I'll work after work, and I work remotely, so like I end up working more than I, in quote air quotes should, because I don't want to give up all of my output. So it's just something that like causes me stress that probably shouldn't, but it's just I'll keep working on it
No, we
in
should
the
definitely
short term.
talk about that. These are the kinds of things where it's like, uh, this is kind of how I notice mentoring works. I can only act on the inputs I get, and especially when I
Mhm.
don't work with you, and I won't be working with you. It's not like I'm going to go join this company. So yeah, this process is working as intended, right? I say, oh, this sounds good. Any thoughts? You say, wait, I'm working more than I should. That is a huge problem in my mind, but that's by my own gauge. So I think everyone has their own work life balance. And I think that, again, a lot of what I say is I'm infusing my own opinions here, right? So I don't mean to be judgmental when I say this stuff, but you were on parental leave just before this. Presumably, there is a larger than normal workload at home as well. And so by
Mhm.
dipping into those hours, by doing time for your job, that's probably also causing some stress. And I'm guessing that's there. So
Yeah.
I think the best way to do this is to start setting boundaries. And I think the way this could look in terms of work, because you have sort of a cyclical issue here, which is if you set boundaries and say, okay, I'm just not going to do stuff after work, then your anxiety level will rise given that you're saying,
Mhm.
well, I don't have that same output I used to have. What if that was my main value to the company? And then if you don't set boundaries, then you're working beyond the amount of time and then you're having stress in a different way. So, from everything I've seen, the effective leaders, effective staff level engineers are good employees for the time that they work, but they are not heroes. They don't lift more than they should. So, I think that's something that it should at least be an aspiration here. Reason being that it's basically two words for the same thing: anxiety versus stress. Here, which would you rather have? So neither, right?
Yeah.
So how do you think you could achieve something like this with setting boundaries on work time or work volume? Maybe can you envision a
Um,
path between now and let's say 6 months from now where you feel like okay, I've got a healthy balance between these?
yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm still, during sprint planning or something, like I still like allocate the same amount of work. So kind of figuring out my new normal sprint might be helpful in terms of like, I mean, recently I've been on projects where I've grossly underestimated uh, the time and complexity of stuff, and there wasn't enough investigation before I started. So it's kind of just been like a tough period in terms of like I've had these really tough projects, and uh, I want to get it done really bad, and you know, I'm just burning the candle on both ends essentially.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not sustainable. The thing that we've heard a million times in our lives is something's got to give, and the something here is either work, personal life, or I guess I should say like social life, personal life, and so you can take on more work, but it comes at a cost, and it sounds like that cost is too costly, to use
Yeah.
ineloquent words. And so when you measure sprint tasks, is there a point system? Do you do it by like days? Do you use a Fibonacci like
Yeah,
point assigning? How does that work for you?
we do the Fibonacci. We use linear, so it's pretty typical Scrum process.
Okay. Yeah. So how many do you tend to take on? Is a sprint 2 weeks for you?
2 weeks, and on average, people like we have like a set average of like 16, in terms of like just a baseline.
Okay. And how many would you say your average is?
Recently it's been like 10, because I'm handling things that aren't outlined as tasks.
That makes sense. And but you're still saying essentially that 10 is too much.
No, I'm allocating myself more than 10 and then feeling bad that I don't get to it. 10 is like the real value in retrospect.
I see. I see. Okay. Um, so I guess let's approach both questions that came up here. So if it were 10, if you somehow knew the absolute value of this thing would be 10, and you said, I'm going to take on 10, do you think that would lead to a balance that you're happy with?
Um, I think that would be a more appropriate planned sprint for sure. It just feels like not enough at the beginning of the sprint, but then yeah, at the end of the sprint, that's actually what it is. So
So this source of anxiety, how much do you think is internal versus external? At the end of the sprint, you say, here's what I worked on, and people react, whether
mm.
visibly or invisibly. Are you seeing visible reactions, or as an exaggeration here, like, oh, he only did 10 points, this guy's a freeloader? Is it something like that, or is it like it's in your head that that people are looking at you differently? These are people who are or were your peers, and that you're hoping you become staff level. What's kind of playing out there?
I would say nothing is visible. Uh, it's my own like we look at a list of everyone's delivered points though, and so like I'm directly shown against people that are delivering 20 points or you know 20 plus, and it just yeah, I have to like reframe that in my head of like that's not a direct comparison of our output.
Yeah, uh, for sure. I think that needs to happen because I the people who seem to do everything are just a different end of the equation for the something's got to give part of this. You for sure could do 30 points per week and also manage all your tasks. And then these other two things would suffer, or something else I
Mm-hmm.
haven't listed would suffer, right? Um, how many points does your manager tend to take on?
Oh, he's not in the system. He doesn't. He's not on that scale.
And is it because he's a people manager?
Um, he doesn't do any code tasks, and I guess like we do we do like a client meeting basically. So it's just the client team getting compared against.
Okay. The other staff level engineer, what are they doing?
He's on the back end team, so I'm not entirely sure what his like raw output is. I could probably look it up. Um, but I would say on average he does a lot of discrete tasks, um, but also works all the time. He's like got older kids that are like in high school and stuff, so like they don't need to. He kind of like works. you know, whenever he, he wants to.
So just to be clear here, that's not a possible route for you, right? The whole
No,
I'm going to work all the time and brute force my way through this. Okay, and
no.
if you found out that's what's needed for this job, would you say, okay, that's what's needed? That makes it very clear. My interviewing skills will come in handy because I do need to go elsewhere.
Yeah, probably. That's kind of what I found out that my wife was pregnant with this kid that we had the day after I accepted this position.
Hmm.
So um, if I had known that I was going to have another kid, I might have taken a job or looked for a job at a larger company.
Yeah.
The startup thing is just like everybody's wearing a lot of hats and going super hard. So culturally, uh, it just worked out this way. But I think I like operating at this scale because you can have so much impact. Um, like, you could ship a feature that, drastically changes sales, next week, or like the sales team can use it next month. Um, but there's like a lot of infrastructural things in the company that aren't developed yet, like policies and things like that. And it's just part of the scale.
And well, yeah, and rapid growth usually leads to processes lagging behind, and then all of a sudden a need for the process. Then some of the original engineers who were used to the culture of no process being disgruntled, and there are certainly growing pains there. Um, Given what you've said, there aren't a lot of examples at the company. We have a couple of more senior level people that we're talking about here. Your manager, who is not doing IC level work at all and isn't expected to, but partially because they're a people manager. And this other staff level engineer who is willing to sort of push the boundaries of work life balance. I think neither is a route that it sounds like you want to pursue. One, because I asked directly, and the other, well, actually both, I guess. You don't want to be a people manager and you don't want to push the boundaries of your work life balance. So I think it is worth talking to your manager. It sounds like you have a good relationship with them. I would probably say something like, here are my concerns about this. And again, I think this goes back to the snapping to their expectations a little bit. Uh, yeah, leaning on them. I would say mention your concerns here because you're going to be potentially the first staff level engineer who is not pushing their work life balance too much and who then needs to find a balance between all these different tasks. And possibly it means that you have some number of sprint tasks, but that it might not be 10. And it certainly isn't that you're taking more than 10 and it ends up shrinking down to 10. I think there needs to be that visibility probably for your team so that they can decide what falls to other people.
Okay,
So,
makes
so
sense.
do you feel comfortable sharing that sort of anxiety with your manager?
Yeah, yeah. I have a pretty open relationship about that kind of stuff. So it wouldn't be an issue to have that discussion. And he's also like, I think that he's expressed that like it's not the expectation that you know I should work as much as the other staff level engineer. Like it's kind of like not an expected amount of work.
Okay, that's good. Again, all signs are pointing to your manager has your back, which is not always the case and is incredibly reassuring because they're the person you report to. So
Yeah, sure.
if they didn't, that would be really bad. Let me see what I was writing here. The manager may also have explicitly expressed Cal doesn't even work as much as the other side. Oh yeah. Yeah. So I think that's a good starting point because if they say something like, you already kind of hinted at what you think they would say, but if they said something like, too bad, suck it up, that's a good signal for you, right? And it doesn't even necessarily mean the job won't work or I can't achieve this. It means that you need to go about it in a different way. And this is why we'll have some time in between sessions here so that we can figure out, okay, did you talk to your manager? How did things go? Now that you've had a few weeks to think about it, what has happened? So I think that's good. I think the other thing here is you should think about the something's got to give equation, which is how much longer could you do this for before the stress became maybe overwhelming, before burnout started setting in, before all of a sudden other opportunities look more appealing just because they're not this opportunity. So, oh, yeah, go on.
I'm just like, there's a calculus to do with like, the opportunity of like this company could scale and I could be, I have options and stuff like that. So there's you know, yeah, there's a math to do
Yeah.
about like, should I stay or should I look at a larger company or something like that?
And I'm guessing, again, to kind of be clear here, you're talking about if those options could be realized as Like you could sell them if you IPO'd.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is a big consideration too, because for all you know, this could be your final job you have, and then you can do whatever you want, or at least take things easier. There was an article I just saw the title of and read like a paragraph that said something like NVIDIA managers are being paid like $1 million a year or something, so they're not working as hard. And I said to my wife when I was talking about this, I said, I think this is a reflection on society. This shouldn't be newsworthy. Everyone should have to work to just kind of make it by, and then not necessarily push themselves super hard or something like that. We sort of, especially in the US, I think define a lot of our lives around work. So I think when it gets to an unhealthy level and you look around you and you think, well, partially it's the culture, and it's kind of hard to find what's the word, an outlet for this or someone to lean on. So I think your manager sounds like a kindred spirit. I would talk to them. I'd say, here are my concerns. And what I like to try to at least suggest some concrete things. I think a concrete thing could be, I'm going to only take on 8 points of sprint tasks next week. And if you feel like, okay, I underestimated, it turned out to be 10, you said, okay, that's probably fine.
Hmm.
If it turns out to be more, then you can say, maybe I need to try to take on 6 and it ends up being 12 or something like that. Does that sound feasible?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's nobody like, we don't even like start the sprint with a count that people are aware of. It's just the reflection of afterwards. So
Oh, so you don't do estimation beforehand to know that they're even roughly 10 or 12 or 20 points?
we don't do a group estimation. So we do our own prep,
Okay, okay.
and then
So
it's just a retrospect.
is it possible then that you break off a task that you say is, you do some research into it, you spend a couple hours and you find out, oh, this is 16 points. Is it possible for you to put it back into the backlog and then say,
Hmm.
I'll take on something else? Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so if after finding out that a task is too big, try to take on another task that's smaller. I think that's at least a good way of starting this, because here's my goal with this is that you try this, it works, there are no repercussions, and the company and its features grow. If that happens, then at the very least, you can see that loop playing out, and you can see, okay, this is healthy, this is working,
Mhm.
and then all of a sudden you'll be able to pick up more things in the other part of the something's got to give equation. Your personal life, your social life, those things can grow a little bit more. Um, Okay, so I think that's at least something to try. Like I said, kind of homework would be, talk to your manager, try to take on fewer tasks. And if you find that you've taken on too much, try to scale back a little bit. Because it sounds like your work output is good. It sounds like the company's been growing. There's no reason for anyone to be like, this isn't good enough. There are enough engineers now where it's not like, well, they only have 2 people. So if you're going to cut back by 20%, then the company is essentially cutting back by 6%. So
Right.
I'd say to try this out. Is there any other thoughts on this topic?
I don't think so. It's a
Okay.
good place to start.
Okay. Yeah, cool. So I'll move on to interviewing now. I do try to keep the timestamps here. Of course, I've got about 22 minutes. I'm not super firm on that, but I want to try to stick to an hour. So the
Sure.
interviewing stuff. You said you haven't really interviewed in a while because the jobs you've interviewed for, you've just kind of gotten. So I'm guessing you're talking more on the side of like the sort of leak code style things, or what do we mean when we're talking interviewing?
Yeah. So like the job before this one, I think it was they used HackerRank, and it was like an actual coding problem that was relevant to the job. So it wasn't like a leak code at all. Um, I haven't had to do leak code problems since like my first job essentially. Like I had like a job at an agency, and they made me do like a fizz buzz or something like. So I've never really had to go super hard on leak code, um, because I mean I've been in front end, and I've been lucky because I know that's a thing even in front end. People want you to do algos, but it is something where like if I went to a larger company, they're probably probably gonna make me do leak code style questions for the interview, so I need to prepare for that to be a thing.
Okay. So let's back up a step here. I know you said you'd like these skills, and then if you got promoted to staff tomorrow, that these would not have been a waste of your time. So
Right.
we can pursue these as separate goals, but I still want to understand this goal in independence. Uh, what is the benefit of having these skills? What's the benefit of potentially shifting to a company? And you've mentioned a bigger company a couple of times. Would that be the goal if you were to shift? Is to find something that's bigger? Is that one of your criteria?
Um, Yeah, I don't think I would ever go. Yeah, for right now, at this time of my life with young children, I think bigger companies would be the move if I didn't stay here.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, in terms of the skills, like I think interviewing skills kind of translate to a lot of other things like presentational skills and things like that. So I think in general, being able to speak, and think in real time is something that I don't often have to exercise. So it's a muscle I'd like to flex.
Yeah, I think that this is good as part of the discovery because these are skills we can pursue independently. Interviewing is certainly something we can do, but right now we sort of have on the pile the sort of anxiety and stress around a new framework at work, which is the staff stuff. And then we
Mhm.
have interviewing, and we could just throw presentation stuff onto this stack and talk about that separately if we want.
Sure.
Maybe it comes as part of interviewing. Totally fine. I don't mind as long as you're getting value from these sessions. So, um, let me reread this just to make sure I got this. So bigger companies for sure. I think that part makes sense. And so this, I'm the one who brought up leak code, but I do think some bigger companies in the US focus on that, but I
Hmm.
don't think they all go full throttle on it. So, and you said you're remote now. Is that also another criteria? Would you want to stay remote?
Yeah, I don't think it would be feasible for me to get anything like at my pay scale in my city. It'd be tough to get into my state, and then I'd pretty much have to stay remote to keep growing,
Yeah,
essentially.
I see. Yeah, this is something where we're in a little bit of a weird state because after the pandemic, a lot of companies clawed back their employees, went back to the office.
Yeah,
And there are some companies that are known for being fully remote, and yet those generally pay a little lower, which I don't know how much that's a factor, but um,
yeah.
foregoing that conversation for right now. So, interview skills, translating presentation skills. And then is there anything else here? Yeah. So the interviewing itself, again, if you stayed at the job, what would be the value? And let's say you had presentation skills. You snap our fingers and you've mastered that. You stay at your job, you become staff. Where else is there value in learning how to interview?
Learning how to interview.
Yeah.
Um, I do a lot of interviews. I conduct a lot of interviews on the other side. So uh, I guess being aware of being able to discriminate, uh, good candidates is something that like might come with being a skilled interviewer.
Do you ask a standard question every time, or is it tailored to each candidate?
So the way that we do it now is we have um, like a 2 hour project, and then um, the meeting that we do that like myself and like another engineer will do with the candidate will be a pair programming session where they're driving.
I see. So pair programming where they drive. Is that process working well? Have you seen that the hiring bar for the company seems appropriate for the kind of work that everyone's doing?
Yeah, I think we've been able to filter out a lot of um, you know maybe subpar candidates, and the level that we've hired at has been really good. So I think like that's why we're being able to pump features out at the rate we are now. So the new people are like really skilled.
I see. And so, is there a concern that this process shifts or that you should potentially be the person to shift it?
Um, I don't think so. I guess maybe in that way, there's not a huge problem with the process as it is now. It
Yeah.
seems like it's working for us so far, but um, yeah, I don't know. Like, what else do you think might be a benefit of the interview skills?
So, I think the biggest benefit is I think there are two, in my mind at least. And one is your algorithmic and data structure skills.
Sure. Yeah, that
And
is
the other
probably the
is,
weaker point of my programming skills too, because I
well,
haven't had to.
sorry, I didn't hear you because I was still talking. What did you say?
Oh, sorry. I was just saying, like, yeah, that's probably like a weakness in my programming skill too. Like, that's like a design. the design patterns and stuff like that that I'm trying to get better at.
I see. By the way, I should definitely add that here too. Design skills, because I know you'd mentioned that at the beginning and it slipped my mind. Um, and then the second is job mobility. So interviews are the gateway to jobs. And so if you want to get
Mhm.
another job, beyond that, I don't think of presentation skills as being too much a part of it, unless you're talking about behavioral interviews where I ask you things like, so tell me about your last job. And we kind of talk about things. And then I say, okay, well, how did that project go? What could you have done better? That I think has a little bit to do with presentation skills, but I think I would mostly separate it into its own category. Um, so I think there are multiple ways to approach improving what we'll call design, I suppose. And I think one way could be interviews, but I think it's hard to it's hard to translate an interview question to real world experience. A lot of times it's something like discern what data structure you need. Okay, I need a graph for this. And then what's the optimal time complexity you might have?
Mhm.
And okay, you've determined those things. Now you write out the code. That's not code you ever have to maintain. It's not code you have to test or come back to other than just in that interview. And then you're done, you've moved on. I think where design skills come into play the most is when it's code is going to be maintained or looked at by other people, because that's when making the wrong decisions might start compounding on itself. And then over the course of 3 years, you've got tech debt that now you have to go back and set aside, 30 points of sprint tasks just to undo. So
Yeah.
for something like that, I I wonder if there's a way to get this experience using to some extent the code base you have at work, like had like to take on maybe not even take on the task, maybe just identify how things could be improved and almost as a side project and not to do it exactly. So just to be
Mhm.
clear, it could be, hey, we have to do this process every time we I don't know, spin up a new instance or get a new client. It doesn't matter the exact work. And here's a way we could improve that process. And then how would we go code it? That could be an interesting thought exercise. Alternatively, it could be an interesting idea to do some of the larger design problems, which I guess are a different kind of interview. So there are the interview questions like design Twitter. I don't think this is what you're talking about though, because to me, this is a lot of like sort of cloud design, infrastructure
Yeah.
design. Yeah.
That's
So
not gonna fall under me.
yeah. So not this stuff. Okay. Yeah. So it's mostly code design and it's mostly for the kind of code base you work with. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I think I'll just write down my ideas around this stuff, which is analyze current code base for improvements and not even do them, and then come up with a side project that may help. I'm very hesitant to ever suggest something that is strictly a side project. I think time you are working can also be time you spend learning. But I think anything on the side, especially you just mentioned kids, and uh, it could be a strain. So I think we'd have to probably get creative on how we could tackle that. You did mention though that you're reading a book in your free time on being a staff engineer. Out of
Mhm.
curiosity, have you finished the book since you started it?
I kind of like got what I needed out of it and put it to the side. I didn't finish it to the back, but it's mostly like interviews after you get past a certain point with like staff level people and about like what their responsibilities are and that kind of
I
stuff.
see. So are books generally a good route for you? Are you comfortable taking on a book recommendation or two?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, like
Um, so I don't have any. But the reason I ask is because, as you know, this is live streamed. And so if someone in chat is like, oh man, I read the best design book, this will definitely help. I mean, they've heard the same context I've heard from this. That could be a good way of doing this. And then, because what I want to avoid is like, well, look, if you spent 4 hours on a Saturday and you tackled this kind of project, yeah, sure, that can definitely be a way to learn. But that might not
mhm.
fit into the lifestyle or structure that you want or have. So, but I do think the whole analyzing the code base, I think this is where you can leverage other people at your company. There are other engineers there, and if you were to ask them something like, "What are the woes that you see? Where could we improve things?" Maybe even just look through the backlog of tasks, and maybe something else that could be interesting. Do you have access to the back end code at your company?
Yep.
Yeah. So, how familiar are you with it?
Um, like it's all in the same language, so it's all in TypeScript. So I don't have an issue with finding what I need. I will often reference it if I need to figure out how something works, like a graph call or something.
I see. Have you at all considered it from a design perspective when you're looking through the code of, oh, this is an interesting way that they've done things, or how is it that this works? Probably what you're looking for at the time is a specific, like, how do I get this data to show in the front end? But have you ever
Mhm.
considered it from a design perspective?
I have learned. I've learned some. I definitely would say that I've learned a couple things from seeing how things are like laid out and organized and that kind of stuff. Um, yeah, I guess. Uh, what do you have in mind in terms of like what I would glean from it?
So what I was just thinking is there are different patterns you might use on back end and front end depending on what you're doing,
Mhm.
and a lot of there are some things in common, but they take place in different ways. So you might want caching on both layers, but the way you do it in the back end might be a totally separate service or something like that. Um, I was wondering if maybe you'd stumbled on something where you thought, okay, this looks unique. Like, what are they doing here? What did it try to accomplish? Because I think that we can touch on this experience from a bunch of different ways. One is by getting you the firsthand, like, you code a project and you do something, whether it's for work, whether it's for fun. Another is you analyze what other people have done and you absorb why they might have done things that way. And another is you talk to people about those decisions. And I don't know, how many people would you say are more senior than you at the company? Not in terms of tenure, but in terms of, I guess, experience.
Um, like time at the company or time in the industry
Time in the
type thing.
industry. Yeah.
Uh, like maybe one or two.
Okay. So not many. Um,
Yeah,
and I'm guessing one is the staff engineer, and there might be one other person. Yeah. So
yeah.
because this is another way. And by the way, I think when it comes to learning, age, tenure, experience, all don't really matter. It just matters, does that person have the knowledge or skill that you want, and can they teach it to you? So, to some extent, you could still reach out to somebody and say something like, hey, I'm working on a new feature. How might you design it? In fact, you mentioned that you spec things for other people. Back before you spec things for people, people spec them for themselves, or at least some set of those people did. Do you read other specs at the company?
Um, there's like proposals, and I always read all the proposals. Especially the staff engineer is probably the only person that has taken the time to write like large scale proposals for features.
Yeah,
Um, because they can propose features like that, big rewrites and stuff like that. Like if we have like some tech debt that we have to tackle, he'll kind of like fully think out all the decisions around it in a document. Um, Yeah, but yeah, I'll look at other tickets and how they're set up, especially because people will mention like, this project's really well organized and in like a retro or something, and I'll check it out.
when you say this
We
project, you
just
mean the back end?
like no, like if somebody mentions like, this project that I'm working on, it's been really nice to have this level of detail in the tickets and stuff like that. I'll look at it to try to replicate it.
I see. I see. Also, what is your relationship with the other staff engineer? I know you said you work on different aspects of the product.
Yeah, so he's a back end and I'm front end.
Hmm.
So we I don't know, I would say we talk a few times a week, but nothing. We don't like usually work one on one together. Usually, my manager will try to pair different people up together on different projects so that everybody can, because we're remote first. So it's just kind of like how we get to know each other.
Yeah. Have you, so you don't have, I know you say you talk a few times a week. Is that in a one on one?
No,
Okay.
just like on questions or offhand, you know, conversation.
I see. Are you comfortable with approaching them and saying something like, hey, could we have a once every 4 weeks meeting or something like that?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm not even necessarily sure. I think if you were to approach them, there'd probably have to be like a, hey, I've been talking about design skills. Um, and I was talking to someone else who suggested that what if I were to look into work design patterns that happen? And maybe one of the biggest questions I'd have for them is, how did you learn this? And if they suggest a book, for example, that's a great way. If they just say, well, look, I just did this enough, then you could maybe say, well, what patterns have you extracted out of doing that? And essentially, those patterns would be design patterns for which there are books, and
Mhm.
those could be practiced too. But yeah, maybe set up a talk with the other engineer, and a low frequency. I don't think those are the kinds of things that need to be really formal or anything. And if after two of those talks or one talk even, or the person just says no, it's not even worth pursuing then if you feel like you're not getting the value out of it. But these are people who are closer afield to you than I am. So, okay, let me see because we're sort of running out of time here. So, presentation skills are kind of the last thing I wanted to talk about, but I don't want to move on without asking, are there any other thoughts on the last topic, design skills, interviewing?
I don't think so. The other thing that I was going to mention is that I just had a project that I'm wrapping up right now where I had to refactor the whole thing like 3 or 4 times
Yeah.
because I got to a point in the process where I realized that I had to do it a totally different way, and that felt bad. And I didn't know if that's something that like you could prepare, like if my skills were at a higher level or something, like could I have accounted for those decisions beforehand, or is that just like a part of the process?
So, I am a major fan of retrospectives, and I think asking what went well, what went poorly, and what can be improved. And to be clear, these second two questions are different. What went poorly is just like what was bad, and then basically how could it be improved, I guess. How could it be improved? So in this case, you've identified what went poorly. Presumably some things went well too, but given that we don't have much time, I want to focus on this part, which is what were your concrete takeaways from that? Or not necessarily to ask you what they are concretely, but did you have concrete takeaways from that? If you were presented with the same general situation, so like we have to do something, it involves a refactor of the whole code, I've identified this, are there
Mhm.
steps you feel you would take differently?
If I had understood how a specific library worked better, I could have designed. Essentially, it's like a form validation library Zod. If I had understood how parts of Zod worked better initially, I could have saved a ton of time. Um, Originally, I didn't even use Zod on this project, but I kind of it came out of it. So, um, yeah, so like it was just like a series of points where like one, I should have cut a release at a
Mm-hmm.
certain point before I went into a huge refactor, so that we could have gotten feedback over time about the feature. And then after that, I should have um, kind of grokked Zod more before I started working with it because I had to redesign very tricky, messy parts of the application like over and over.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's good. I think from any retrospective, if you can identify that something went poorly and you don't identify what could be improved, even if it's one or two small things, then probably something's wrong with the retrospective process. So I don't think we need to at least work on retrospectives necessarily, but asking these questions is always a good thing. And in this case, if you think about what you need to do next time, the way you can grok something more easily or maybe more thoroughly, I wrote a couple of ideas here, prototypes. Like, hey, here's a like a microcosm of what our code base does. What would it look like for that? And then the consulting with others part, maybe, and this isn't always possible. Maybe there's a Zod expert on the team. Maybe even through the stream or through Discord or something like that, you could potentially find someone and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking of doing. It's always good to reach out to other people and have them validate things because I've found that when we come up with ideas in isolation, they sound a lot better than they end up being.
Yeah.
and, and so this is where I think teams are needed for a lot of software projects. Some people do tend to have slightly better ideas than other people, just like how some people are luckier than other people. But I think that two people or three people or four people all working together on something, it really minimizes the risk of something kind of going a little bit wrong. The other thing is, in this case, you've probably learned a lot about Zod. You've hopefully taken some notes on it. So you're minimizing the amount of new things that you've experienced. So maybe you hadn't used a validation library before, and again, code culture grew, and there were enough engineers where you're like, we need to validate things. We can't. So
Yeah.
yeah, I want to kind of wrap up a little bit because I think what time is it? Yeah. What are your just general thoughts from what we've talked about here? Any, does this seem like a good idea? Would you want to do a session two? Because I'm totally for it. That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you kind of like understand where I'm coming from. You have a lot of direct feedback on like, you know, especially the interpersonal stuff within the company that I'm not like experienced in. So like I think it's been helpful to
Okay,
me.
good. Yeah. Yeah, and remember, my number one goal is like make sure you're getting some value, and it doesn't have to be every session, but if you're fine with this, then I'm fine with this. So nice to meet you, Kyle, and we'll
Nice to meet you as
schedule another
well.
session at some point. But I'll say my goodbye now and head back to the stream.
All right,
But
awesome. Thank you very
yeah,
much. Thanks for the time.
yeah. Take care. Bye.
All right, see you.
Okay. Wow. What a fun time. Let's go back to this and lock this. So what do people think? Yeah, great job, Beardage. Really, round of applause. I really should have said this on in the call, but that takes a lot of guts to be in this position. And yeah, I can't imagine being on Beardage's side of this because I was already super excited, and I'm on my side, and I'm like, oh man, this is super cool. Yeah, it's been 1 hour already. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I was typing the time. Yeah, 1:31. So the next question I had, of course, some people are already typing this stuff, but is this the kind of thing you would want to tune in for specifically? I plan on doing this where at the very least, oh man, gross. Thank you. Thank you for the gifted subs. So you'd want to watch this series. Are you, okay, cool. Yeah. Wow. Well, yeah, I'm super energized. I think that was great. I'm excited to see too. I think the most satisfying part of mentoring is seeing somebody grow and knowing that you had a part in that. So yeah, I'm excited. I'm looking forward to this.